So we just might spend a few minutes just talking about what's next for 7SIGNAL. We've had quite a journey over the last few years, in particular, with the introduction of Mobileye and the increasing importance of Wi-Fi in mission critical applications. And looking towards where we are in 2022, we've really hit a big growth patch. We're investing heavily in both of our products, transforming our backends for scale, investing particularly in some latest tooling to be able to do proactive trending and analysis. I don't want to get all marketing and talk about machine learning and AI, but we're starting to put the building blocks in place to do more of that in addition to our homegrown algorithms. We're really focused on innovating around specific customer use cases where we're seeing practical value in the field with our customers. So in the next half of the year, we're significantly focused on Wi-Fi 6, and Jim already talked a little bit about OFDMA. The next thing we're turning to there is spatial reuse and looking at BSS coloring and how that's performing in real world use cases. And we have some new sensor hardware coming out, first of all, with Wi-Fi 6 radios. So the AX radios will be in this year and with 6 gigahertz capability early next year. We're also really focused on the fact that we have a lot of data, but it's not so much about how much data you have, it's about what you do with it. So while Sapphire in particular appeals very much to a technical audience and wireless engineers, we're also wanting to make the data more consumable for general IT operations users, and we're focused on level 1 KPIs. MCS is a really good example of that, but real performance indicators that help us to communicate where problems are and cut the time to identify those problems and to know where to go to find the root causes of those problems. In Mobileye, we have a slightly different challenge than we have in Sapphire. So we are now seeing this very large deployments in enterprise, and the Mobileye application is designed to be deployed everywhere as a standard operating environment in enterprise. And that really supports 3 use cases. The reactive troubleshooting is pretty obvious. Targeted sampling of high value devices is another use case. But then we also really look towards representative sampling, so statistically sampling different types of platforms in different locations and getting a representative sample of the experience of devices across a large organization and being able to move monitoring around to where it's needed. With that comes a bigger data challenge. So we're releasing in September improved analysis where we look across different dimensions. We're going to look at focus on where those problems are shared, whether that's shared by a physical location because of the RF environment, where it's shared by a platform, perhaps because of drivers, for example, or where problems might be shared by endpoints because something in the back end on a route is down. And being able to use our crowdsourced data from those devices much more effectively to really zone in on the root cause of a problem and help IT staff to know where to look, which throat to throttle, if you like, when there's a problem.
I was going to ask you for the Sapphire Eye. Right now in your hardware platform, you only have 1 radio?
In the hardware platform? Yeah. No, there are 2 radios.
2 radios?
Yes.
Okay, so you could use 1 for the active, 1 for the passive, or you both can do both?
At the moment, we're using 1 radio at a time. We're actually in discussion about potential different models. Particularly, with our new hardware, we'll actually have 3 radio slots. So we may introduce some different nuances with our testing in the future. But right now, it's 1 radio at a time.
And for the 6E, is it like which card are you using? Is it the Intel, or is it like a custom radio?
Yeah, it's not a custom silicon. It's vendor-based silicon.
Okay.
Access point silicon. 4x4.
In the remainder of Mobileye, then for the year, we're introducing more customized service levels. So big deal that we're seeing is being able to adjust service levels for different types of designs and different use cases. Now that we're much more focused on different industries, service levels and thresholds customization has been really important. And we're now at a level of maturity with the product. We're introducing new alarms and as well as a brand new REST API later in the year. And that's in really preparation for 2023. The 3 big directions that we're following for Mobileye. Probably the main one in 2023 is More Connected, and that's really looking at those integrations about what data we can bring in from other sources to correlate with our own data for our own dashboards, but also places where we can integrate our data and provide context, put our data in context with the thought that, IT operations and AI ops tools are just starting to gain a little bit of traction in our large enterprise customer base.
Do you still have the on-premises appliance, or is everything in the cloud now?
Everything's in the cloud now.
And how does that present itself if you're trying to hook into other systems that are managed on-premise?
So
On-site call managers, for example, right?
Right. So I think, have you got a view on that?
So with Sapphire, it's like any other cloud sourced API or webhook. So if that on-premises device can accept that, then we can make it work.
So the other two directions are broader and deeper. So this is really about, from a broader perspective, we occupy a pretty unique position in the client space in these networks. So the CPU and memory utilization, we're looking at disk utilization and other metrics around the operating system that may be indicative of causes for performance degradation. We're also looking at potentially some security identification, looking at what encryption methods are in use, looking at APs that may be flying that clients are seeing that are showing a corporate SSID that aren't corporate APs, various use cases like that. And the deeper side of things is really about just extracting that value, applying some more machine learning and dashboarding to expose the data more broadly within the organization than the network engineering group. But I think I wanted to ask you guys, we talked a bit about Wi-Fi 6. Is there anything else in Wi-Fi 6 that, I know it's been a question we've been asked over the last day or so a few times, and 6 gigahertz. Is there anything in particular you guys are interested in learning? Say if you were able to sit in a real environment and run a packet capture continuously, and spend the time doing the analysis, is there any particular questions you'd want to answer? Keith?
I think it's a catch-22, because what I want to ask you is what is happening in your client environments with Wi-Fi 6 to then focus on those things that are failing. Well, you don't know what those are until you look. Like one of your slides had BSS coloring, and I don't care one hoot about BSS coloring. So if you were going to throw some development dollars at that, I'm like, why? But I would really like to know how much OFDMA is happening, how it's split up, which clients are doing it, to see, am I getting that efficiency that I promised my customer? Right. So, but on the other hand, if you had BSS coloring and you came back and said, yeah, we're getting a 62% improvement on those who have it versus those who don't, I would really care then. So.
Yeah, and just to clarify, our first look at BSS color is literally just what are the color tags?
Is it there? Of
the APs on the channel, right? And is there what I've been calling a BSS color collision, right? When the colors are the same and they're not supposed to be. But I think you're talking about like spatial reuse operations.
But if it's not efficient, then I don't want it turned on. So it could be there and even triggering, but if it isn't actually solving the issue, then I should know about it. But that's a lot of development work to get to that answer if it's not even turned on.
That's right. And, another approach is no new development. Just observe the changes in Wi-Fi performance through those periods as you're making changes, right? So, you mark in time, hey, this is where that spatial reuse parameter was changed, and see if you get the result you expected to see. So
I was going to say one thing with the duration for storage and things like that, and you're looking for more things. There's large public venues specifically. I know some of the ones I support, for instance, they'll be professional sports most of the time, but then like a concert comes in, right? And so the entire configuration of the venue is different for the concert, right? And they care, how does Wi-Fi work for the concert versus how does it work for the sports games, right? And so I think a couple things that might be useful. would be if I had a concert in that specific configuration and then I had another one 6 months later, I would want to be able to compare the two.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we're always getting asked like, hey, come in and take measurements, help us figure out what changes we could potentially make to improve it, and then come to the next one and do the same thing, right? But if they're 6 months apart, that's not going to fit that model, right?
Yeah.
And if they're 6 weeks apart, then they do, you know?
Yeah. And our LPV customers are doing that. They're, they've decided on what metrics they really care about, and they just offline store reports from those events.
Okay.
So they don't lose the data when the roll.
Well, it's not live data to live data, but it's a report on that data that you collected at that point in time.
That's right.
A new report.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to 6 gigahertz in particular, it's still new, so we're not, and drivers are still being updated for it. So we don't necessarily have any visibility into what clients are doing when they roam. We know how they can by the standard, but what are they actually doing? And that roaming decision making, whether it's in 6 gigahertz or in 5 gigahertz, that's sort of a black box to a lot of us. We don't have visibility into what that driver's decision making is. So any visibility we get on that, on what they tried and failed, and then went to whatever was successful would be beneficial.
Yeah.
I have a hint on that, having talked to a variety of vendors, that in the past, vendors have been very unique and proprietary in their algorithms, both for associating and for roaming. And with new 6E chips, the chip manufacturers are being less flexible, that the actual end clients have hardly any choice. Your data collection could either refute that or confirm it. And if it's confirmed, that would mean we can design now more comprehensively, that we know it's going to act like this, rather than it could act 7 different ways. So if you could capture that and then say it's consistent, really consistent from the last 6 months, and it hasn't changed, then we can design to meet that a little easier.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I'll tag on top of what both Chris and Keith have said, is you have a lot of data. You have a lot of data on the different types of devices. Mm-hmm. I think it's more about knowing how the devices work with the wireless network and being able to trend that data and say, all right, I have this specific scanner on this specific version. I need to somehow hold this device manufacturer accountable because I don't have that data from them, and say, all right, this is the positivity or negative effect of certain changes done to devices, or even a change to a separate device. I could maybe use your sensors to get a demo of X number of newer devices I plan to upgrade to. If I know that I can compare what I currently have to what I may purchase millions of dollars of, I can make a wise decision and say, all right, maybe this is not the way we should go, because we predict that this could lead to a better or worse efficiency or productivity for the workforce.
Yeah. So we're looking very closely at being able to do, in support of a troubleshooting use case, peer analysis. So to be able to say if this user is having a particular problem, is that problem common at the location where they are? Is it shared by the adapter they've got? How do other adapters, other devices like that?
I get why you might not want to publish it, because then you put a vendor's name on it or a manufacturer's name on it. But for like our sake, to be able to maybe with the API put that data together ourselves, or have some sort of custom reporting that we can look at, then that would be beneficial.
Mm-hmm. I think an additional slice that you can think through is not just by vendor or by driver amount. Is this a K-12? Is this a edu? Is this a manufacturing? And then be able to that industry say, this is what we see your peers are doing. So not just the device peers, but the industry peers.
There's some evidence to say that it's not just a client vendor issue or an AP vendor issue, that there's some cross-compatibility differences as well. So one client type may work better with a particular vendor, but it may work worse on another vendor. So we're being cautious about kind of going and publishing that data, but it's certainly there. And for our own customers within their data set, we're providing the ability to compare.
So I noticed you didn't have anything to do with client power utilization. And as we go into the IoT world, that will start to become more important. We've also got targeted wait time as well as sleep times that could be analyzed. Any thoughts about doing that down the road?
Some thoughts. Love to hear what kind of analysis would be most beneficial there. But target wait time is one of those headline features for Wi-Fi 6, and we're starting to see devices that support it now. So
yeah, it's a tough one because you're putting it on the client and you don't want to consume the power of the client, and that's what you're trying to measure. So it's a tough one.
Right. Yeah, and some of that may be done by Sapphire.
Yeah,
right?
that might be better done
without an impact on the client.
Yeah.
I guess 2 questions. One is, we didn't really talk about it, but are you still testing wired? Also, if I'm on a wired client, can I do wireless and wired testing?
Sapphire does. Mobileye is Wi-Fi only.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then once upon a time, there was going to be like a micro eye. Is that gone, or are you doing something with that?
No, we still have that. That's the 250 model. So smaller, desk mounted.
So if I didn't have a device to put it on, but I wanted to care about like a pseudo experience from that area, I can throw it on the desk, under a desk, whatever.
Yeah.
So
That's still a thing.
we have a Sapphire Eye sensor that's in a smaller form factor, so it can be desk mounted. That runs as a dedicated hardware sensor. We can also run Mobileye on a mini PC, so you can get a Windows 10 mini PC on a USB stick and load Mobileye on there and plug it in a corner somewhere. And in fact, I think there's a couple of stadium use cases where there's particular rooms where they wasn't appropriate to mount a sensor, and they've put Mobileye in a dining room or a guest area.